All right, folks, Jeffro's Journey here. So today we're testing out the 12.5-inch barrel from CAC, mid-length 1-in-7 twist. Got the buffers that we're testing in the different springs. So right now we're testing the stock buffer and spring. I fired 2 rounds already, and it looks like we're projecting closer to about 2:15, 2:30-ish, maybe even 2 o'clock. So call it 2 to 2:30. It's 23.5 grains of accurate 2230. It's a 55 grain bullet that we're using. It's a relatively light load. The recoil is not bad at all. And we're already ejecting at, let's just call it 215 for argument's sake. So I did fire 2 rounds just to check for function with the ammo. Right now the 2 shots chronoed at about 2,400 feet per second. So relatively mild load. But I'll go ahead, I'll shoot a few more rounds, and then we'll swap out with a different buffer and buffer spring. And we're going to use the same ammo for all the testing. We'll see what happens. All right, gun's empty. Let's see what we got. Yeah, so the average of the 5 shots was 2395, standard deviation at 10 feet per second. The group down there doesn't look that bad. So I think we found a 55 grain blinking load. All right, next up we have the blue Springco spring with the H1 buffer. Same ammunition. All right, well I can already tell you that was a nice reduction in felt recoil. Well, this is interesting. So the average of those 5 shots went from 2395 to 2343, a standard deviation of 11. So what did we lose? 95, 43, so is that 52 feet per second just by changing both, yeah, the buffer and the buffer spring. Interesting. All right, and the snow flurries are moving in, so that's nice. I mean, that was the recommendation. The Springco blue with the H2, and I mean, it was a mild shooter. I mean, yeah, that was nice. Definitely a big difference from the stock buffer and spring. This is the red spring with the H1 buffer. Let's get in our rest here. All right, we had good function. I'll tell you, working that charging handle on the red spring, you can definitely tell there's an increase in tension. It is noticeable. Okay, next up we have the Springco red spring with the H2 buffer. All right. Just for some giggles, I think we're going to try the stock spring with the H1 buffer and then the H2 buffer and see what happens. All right, function is good. Take a look at our stats. Average velocity 2381, standard deviation of 45. That's interesting. Not bad. It's interesting to note what happened with that velocity, though. We decreased the the spring tension, and immediately our velocities climbed back up to 2381. The blue spring with the H1 was 2343, blue with the H2 is 2356, red with the H1 is 2347, and red with the H2 is 2351. Go to the stock spring with the H1 and it's 2381. So spring tension might have something to do with velocity. All right, and now we have the stock spring with the H2 buffer. Let's take a look at our stats. Average 2357, standard deviation of 11. We'll talk about the conclusions back at the shop, the garage rather. And did I mention it's like 30 degrees out here with a 5-mile-an-hour wind? Snow flurries on occasion. Ah, it's a great day to do some shooting. Oh boy, I gotta tell you, that range day, it was cold. Whew. Took me about a couple weeks to thaw out. Okay, so I didn't go over all the information that I had while we were out there just because of the wind noise. It was cold. I had some other testing I wanted to get done. But let's go over that other information right now. When doing that test to figure out the ejection pattern, I wrote down a couple of things. Obviously, the buffer weight and spring tension combination that we used, what the ejection pattern was, the average velocity, the function of the firearm, and the felt recoil that I perceived while shooting. Spoiler alert, the function was fine across all different combinations. So the first thing that we tested was just the stock carbine buffer and carbine spring. I don't know if you guys could tell, but with a mild load and the stock configuration that it came from PSA, it was ejecting at 2 o'clock. I think I got the spring and buffer from PSA. Not exactly sure, but I think I did. But that would make sense, right? Least amount of spring tension, least amount of buffer weight with a mild hand-loaded 223 load. It was ejecting at 2 o'clock. The average velocity was 2395. The recoil, yeah, it was there. It was noticeable, right? I mean, 223, 556 isn't going to hurt anybody, but yeah, you can tell, right? So the next configuration we ran was the Springco Blue Spring with the H1 buffer. That fixed the ejection pattern to about 315. So a noticeable difference just by going up that extra spring tension and that extra buffer weight. I think Springco advertises their blue spring to be about a 15% increase in tension over the standard carbine spring. And the H1 buffer, I think I might have written that down somewhere, is, yeah, 3.8 ounces. And that was using the CAC heavy buffer. So, ejection pattern at 315, the recoil was fairly mild. It was definitely a noticeable improvement over the carbine spring and carbine buffer. What I found interesting is that the average velocity dropped from 2395 to 2343. Makes sense, right? We're increasing the tension on the spring. We're increasing the buffer weight. So we're going to need to steal more gas from the barrel into the action to cycle. Makes sense. Now, gas port is about here, and the end of the barrel is about right there. So let's call that, let's call it 3 inches, okay? So in that 3 inches, we lost roughly 50 feet per second just to cycle the action with the heavier spring and buffer weight. Okay. Note to self, if you're going to work up loads, work it up with the spring and buffer combination that you're going to use. Otherwise, whatever information you get is not going to be applicable if you start changing stuff, right? So I was very happy that just going with that change put our ejection pattern right at about 315. The next combination we ran was the blue spring with the H2 buffer. Average velocity 2356, so about the same. And the ejection pattern was at 415. Money, right? That's money. That's right kind of where we wanted to be. And the felt recoil was very nice. Spoiler alert, that's probably the combination that I'm going to go with from here on out. And we'll get into the reasons why shortly. Next, we tried the Red Spring from Springco and the H1 buffer. And I believe Springco advertises that spring tension to be about a 25% increase over the standard carbine spring. Ejection pattern, right at 4 o'clock. Average velocity, 2347. And the felt recoil was very nice. The blue spring with the H2 and the red spring with the H1 were about the same. I could not perceive a difference. And if there was a difference, it was minimal. The next setup we ran was the red spring with the H2 buffer. Ejection was at 4 o'clock, and average velocity was 2351. That recoil was mild. It was not as soft as the blue spring, the blue spring with the H2 or the red spring with the H1, but it wasn't bad, right? If you handed that upper to me and said, here, test it, see what you think, I would have said it was a nice, soft, recoiling firearm. The only reason I can perceive a difference was because we were testing back to back. Next, we tried the stock carbine spring with the H1 buffer. Ejection was at 3 o'clock. Average velocity climbed back up to 2381. Recoil, fairly mild. Not bad at all. And then the last one we tested was the stock spring with the H2 buffer. Ejection was at 345, velocity 2357. And again, recoil was fairly mild. Now, here's where it gets a little ridiculous. So just by changing the spring tension and the buffer weight, we had a spread of 45 feet per second. So the carbine spring with the carbine buffer gave us a velocity of 2395 with a mild to moderate 223 load. The carbine spring and H1 buffer gave us 2381, so it's a decrease in feet per second of 14. And then all of the other combinations that we ran had an average velocity of 2350. So that gave us our net reduction of 45 feet per second. I'm thinking that the buffer weight actually played more of a role than the spring tension. Simply because there is a little bit of space in here in your action where the bolt carrier is just moving without actually touching the spring. I don't know what the measurement is. Call it a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. But the buffer is the only thing, along with the bolt carrier group, keeping contact with the barrel, keeping the bolt carrier group engaged. So by having that extra weight in the system, that would explain why we were seeing slower velocities, because there was more gas needed to be siphoned off from the barrel to actually move the bolt carrier group and the buffer. Not something I would have thought going into this. Good data point to kind of mark down and note going forward. So, yeah. The other part, now this is where it gets weird, right? So we tested a mild to moderate 223 hand load. I did not test factory ammunition, but I can tell you now, when we switched over and started doing our accuracy testing with 8208 XBR, accurate 2230, accurate 2520, and IMR 4895, all of the data that we have here goes out the window. It just flat out goes out the window. With the lighter charges of those 556 loads, we were ejecting at 1 o'clock. The best ejection pattern that we saw was with the red spring and H2 buffer, and that was at 1:30. So while yes, changing your spring tension and your buffer weight may fix, right? Fix an overgassed upper using 223 loads. If you're going to be shooting 556, that may not be the case. I'm not going to say it's 100% not the case, but in my testing, it may not be the case. So I ran the H2 buffer with the red spring, and we were ejecting at 1:30. I ran the blue spring with the H2 buffer, and we were ejecting at 1 o'clock. Really what was happening is the spent brass coming out of the gun was hitting the brass deflector on the upper receiver, and yeah, we've got brass there. There's brass there. Sorry about that. The heater turned on for the garage, so I had to turn that off, otherwise we're going to hear that in the background. Okay, so to recap so far. Mild to moderate 223 loads, overgassed upper, changing your buffer and your spring weight will make a difference. Now, carry that over to self-defense or full 556 loads, not so much. I have a feeling that if this brass deflector wasn't there, I would have been eating brass over my shoulder, and yeah, nobody wants to do that. So what is the next steps going forward? Well, I have on order an adjustable gas block. I did not want to go that route. I was hoping that just changing, for our purposes, the buffer and spring tension would solve the problem using 556 and self-defense loads, or just hot 556 loads in general, but that's not the case. So it's on order. I ordered it from Optics Planet. I did not see that it was out of stock, so it should be 27 to 38 days in stock, hopefully. And then by the time they ship it out to me, who knows? So we'll see. But I think the only way to fix this upper is going to be with that adjustable gas block. There's also a gas tube from BRT. I think it's Black River Tactical. Found them over on m4carbine.net. And what they do is, instead of changing to an adjustable gas block or messing with your buffer and spring, they actually reduce the gas port size in the gas tube to restrict the gas going back into the action. That is an option they have. You go on their website, take a look at their product page. They have a whole different list of questions that they ask you to help decide which gas port is right for you. In the future, hopefully at some point, I want to get a suppressor to throw on here and to throw on the other guns. So going with the gas tube may fix this barrel, or it may not, right? That is also a possibility. But then when we throw the suppressor on, we're going to be adding even more back pressure, depending on the suppressor and all that. I realize that there are low back pressure suppressors and or no back pressure suppressors. In general, suppressors add back pressure. So we could get a different gas tube from BRT, but then we throw the suppressor on, and then everything is back to where we started, and we have to get an adjustable gas block anyway. So just figured, you know what? We've already got $90 in springs and buffer weights. So, no, not $90. Let's call it $60. So, an adjustable gas block is another 60. The gas tube is another 60 or so. Screw it. We're just going to cut out the middleman. We're going to go with an adjustable gas block. So there we go. If you were wondering how different buffer weights and spring tensions affect an overgassed gun, hopefully this sheds some light on it. My recommendation now, if you have an overgassed upper and you are running just a standard gas block and a standard gas tube, go ahead and get an adjustable gas block. Number one, you will be able to dial in how much gas you want. You can work up loads and dial it in. And if you get a suppressor, you can change things then as well. So I think overall the fix that I would recommend for somebody who has an upper that's overgassed is just go ahead, throw on an adjustable gas block. If you're building an upper from scratch, go ahead and throw on an adjustable gas block. Yes, the normal gas blocks are like $25 as opposed to an adjustable, which is $60. Give yourself that cushion, right? Give yourself that leeway that if for some reason your gun comes out overgassed, you have the option built in already to fix the problem. So that's my recommendation. And another recommendation I would say is if you're building your own upper, just go ahead and order yourself a blue powered spring from Springco and an H2 buffer. The H2 buffer I think weighs 4.9 ounces, and that overall seemed to be the softest shooting gun and the best ejection pattern, which would make sense, right? Got a soft shooting gun, you're going to have a softer recoil impulse, you're going to have less gas coming back, you're going to have the brass not flying as far. The action isn't working as violently. So there it is. I hope this helps somebody. Once we get the adjustable gas block, we'll throw that on there. We'll take it to the range. We'll dial it in. And yeah, take care, everybody. See you later.